anybody familiar with Fish Hunt Northwest? Anybody tuning in on a weekly basis? A few guys. I see a number of our swag shirts and hats and whatnot for the support, so we appreciate that. I'm Duane Inglin. I host Fish Hunt Northwest. My wife Sherry is the brains behind the operation. She's over here at our table with all our gear and swag and great beer pints and wine glasses and stuff for Christmas gifts. Make sure you check all that out because really good deals on that stuff. It makes phenomenal gifts, and we'd like to see you wearing our stuff. I mean, who wouldn't, right? So, Fish Hunt Northwest. You know what? Pull out your phone. For anybody that doesn't have a flip phone, pull out your phone.
What?
Yeah. flip phone folks help the guys with the iPhones. All right. Pull out your phone, go to your search bar, put in Fish Hunt Northwest, or put in YouTube, then go to Fish Hunt Northwest. I want you to take a look at it. We are a weekly live show all about fishing, hunting, political dialogue. I hate to use the word political because people think like we're extremely political, but really when I say political, I'm talking about all those issues and things that come up that keep us either off the water or out of the woods that you folks need to be aware of and educated on. So we have a lot of insightful dialogue with in-studio guests. We produce this show live every Thursday out of a studio that we built. It's educational, entertaining, trying to educate folks on all those things that are important. When we talk about fish recovery, saving the orcas, pinniped predation issues, bird predation issues. We have a recipe of the week that Sherry helps host with our chef. We always cook fish, fowl, and game, so you'll have phenomenal recipes if you're tired of just drying out your duck or your goose and having fish that tastes like fish. So we help you with that. The chef has some amazing recipes. Lots of how-tos in the other portion of our studio with really good high-definition how-to segments, overhead views, so you can really see what we're presenting. We take a lot of time and effort to put the show together each and every week, and would really love it if you join us. You can watch us either Facebook or YouTube. We actually multi-stream on both platforms every Thursday night, 7 o'clock. So if you haven't checked it out, go to our YouTube subscription, give us a subscribe, like us over on Facebook, get interactive, friend request me, and enjoy the content. And be interactive. Give us your feedback to let us know what you think, okay? All right, enough of the sales pitch.
Just hit 1,000.
Just hit 1,000 today, finally.
Like a second ago.
Yeah, that just happened right here. We were at 998. This little engine that could. Okay, if you're old like me, you enjoy fishing bait. The evolution of steelhead fishing has been phenomenal the last 15 years. The artificials that work so well are, I don't want to say taking over, but it really makes it advantageous for people to pick up a fishing rod and go chase steelhead nowadays. You have so many options. Jig fishing's been around for a long time. I used to tell a story. I think I was 17 years old, wanted to go down and check out this Cowlitz River thing that everybody's talking about. I grew up here in the Puyallup area. I fished the Puyallup, South Prairie Creek, for those of you that even know where that exists, Carbon River. Those all used to be open for steelhead. And we were catching wild steelhead when I was a kid, and it was phenomenal, okay? I had the benefits of growing up doing that. Fishing egg skein and spawn sack, fishing just corkies, not on a 6-foot leader, but an 18-inch leader. Drift fishing, which we'll talk about a little bit here. That was my upbringing. That was my introduction to fishing. And we've seen it change drastically. We've seen a lot of our options and opportunities disappear. We've seen all facets of fishing just basically going into the toilet. And that's, why shows like ours and others are working hard to educate folks on where we try to get this stuff back to. But catching steelhead back in the day on bait, and or some guys were throwing homemade spinners, or the Okie drifter was a staple in the arsenal. So much has changed in the last 45 plus years that the artificials now, Brandon did a great presentation on BNR soft beads, and they work fantastic. Brandon and I have fished together down in Oregon. A lot of folks are using beads, albeit a hard bead or soft beads, but the soft beads, in my opinion, are like the next level, because when a fish grabs something in their mouth, they take a nanosecond to decide this feels natural or doesn't, and they're either going to spit it out or they're going to continue to chew on it. And rubbery, soft plastics that they can gum feel natural, okay? So Soft plastic worms that JP will get into later with WFO. Worm fishing, love worm fishing. If you think you cannot catch hatchery fish on manufactured rubber worms, you're missing out. If you think, oh, I don't start fishing worms till February when the natives show up, you're missing out. Worms work fantastic, presented properly, under a float or however you want to present them, but they will work for hatchery fish, okay? I'm kind of an old school guy. I've been fishing bait a lot in all facets of fishing. I seldom will ever go fishing without some form of bait with me, one choice or another. Artificials in all realms of fishing work well, but at the end of the day, you just really want to have some bait on board on the boat, in the backpack, or whatever it is you're doing, if you're out hiking around or, you know, if you're on a drift boat, sled, what have you. And there's a number of different ways to present bait. And I've basically rigged 8 rods here today, showing 8 different techniques to all utilize bait and/or scent to aid you in finding success on the river or, you know, the creeks or however you're fishing. Some of it may make sense to you. Some of it may go, that guy is crazy. That'll never work. So I want to take you through multiple presentations and just some things. And I can assure you I've caught fish on every one of these techniques at one point or another. Now, did I catch fish on every technique last year? No. But over the course of time, over the last several years, I've easily caught fish on every one of these techniques. And it's, you know, fishing is evolutionary in that techniques and things you try and things you create and things you make up in your own garage and what you present is your imagination. You know, if you can create something in your garage and go out and fish and have success, there is a lot of satisfaction with that. And at some point, you may start sharing that with other folks. At some point, okay? So, as we get into it, bait scent options for steelhead, drift fishing, bobber dogging, float and jig, bait diver plug, jet diver. Who here is exclusively a bank fisherman or woman? Who does not boat fish pretty much at all? Okay? Who fishes out of boats? Drift boats, pontoons, sleds? The majority. Okay. So this information will resonate with all you folks depending on, you know, where you're at in your fishing hobby. Okay. Any questions so far? I haven't really covered any information other than talking about me, so there's probably no questions. Okay. Drift fishing. Drift fishing has become almost a lost art, unless, you know, you're old, and I qualify. I'm a grandpa, so that's cool. Drift fishing is something I still have a passion for. Drift fishing is not to be confused with dragging a 6-foot leader behind a boat side drifting. Drift fishing is not to be confused with the success of flossing fish on the Puyallup and other rivers that have zero visibility when coho and humpies and chinook are running through. Okay, flossing is a whole different deal. Drift fishing is a presentation where your lead is bouncing the bottom and your offering is moving downriver ahead of the weight, and your offering is basically in the strike zone of the fish. And your leader is no more than 2 foot in length. And oftentimes you're using baits or some type of attractant, scent. For me, drift fishing, old school regs, which is simply a piece of foam with yarn pulled through, multicolored strands. Now, one thing to understand the difference between salmon and steelhead. Salmon, the olfactory is tremendous. They really respond to scent. That's why springers are so difficult to catch at times, and you may have to go through an arsenal of different scents until you finally find something that triggers them on any given day. Steelhead are not necessarily driven by scent. Yeah, scent does weigh in, because if salmon smell in parts per billion, I mean steelhead have a strong olfactory as well, but they are instinctive in how they go after bait and prey, and it's more of a visual stimulation. That's why there's so many different colors across the spectrum that actually will catch fish or entice their bite. Some things to understand about anadromous fish: when they leave the salt water and enter the lower estuary water, they still key in on blacks, blues, and greens. They just came out of the salt water. The bait fish that they're chasing and things that they're eating, steelhead exclusively, like on squid, more so white and grays. But the colors that they learn and understand and how they feed and their feeding habits in the salt are on those base colors, those natural colors. As fish move up into the river, especially salmon, as they begin to degrade in their biomass and how they just start breaking down, getting ready for spawn, everything starts breaking down. Their eyesight changes completely. The colors that they pick up on become more into the reds and oranges, and then eventually greens and chartreuses, okay? It's just how their eyes react. The cones in their eyes change. So you're fishing lower estuary water for fish, and there are great opportunities to go after steelhead and salmon in lower tide water on your river systems. And you're using real vibrant colors early season, you have low gin clear water, you may not entice a lot of bites. Then again, steelhead are crazy, and my buddy Bill Herzog used to say they'd go after a cat turd that was the right color. So they're aggressive eaters. The problem with steelhead is not that they're so hard to catch. The problem with steelhead, there's just not enough of them to catch at times, right? And there's a lot of pressure. We have a number of rivers, not a number, we have a few rivers that have a pretty decent hatchery program. The problem is we have not enough of those rivers with sustained hatchery runs that allow the pressure to spread out. So you feel like you're being choked off with 75 boats on one of our favorite, Wainuchi little rivers down there, and the sleds on the lower end, and everybody's competing for the first water and first fish. And it almost becomes not even, a wonderful experience anymore. So steelhead are not that difficult to catch, right presentation, right color, and they haven't been flogged on or beat on for days. So drift fishing, there is an art to it. I refer to that as a grid pattern search. You're going to cast out upstream slightly out of 45 and allow your presentation to sink. Now, if it just stops and doesn't go with the current, you either haven't hit the current seam or you're using far too much weight. We're trying to match the speed of the current with our presentation so it looks natural. So you have to kind of dissect the hole, and as you throw out there and it begins to move down, you want to collect your slack, and as the pendulum's out in front of you, you can feel the bottom ticking. Now, if it's just hammering the bottom and it's just rocking the rod tip out of your hand, you got too much weight on it. You should feel that thing tick every so often, just maintaining contact with the bottom, and depending on your leader length, which should be less than 2 feet, and how buoyant your lure is, I can actually take this foam lure with this yarn on there and throw it out, and it has a certain amount of buoyancy. I add any one of these oil-based products. What does oil do in water? It floats. So simply by adding a decent amount of scent to any type of presentation you have, some of my yarn balls I'll talk about here in a little bit, you increase the buoyancy. If you're running too long a leader, you may increase that far too much. So there's a fine balance there. Dissecting the river like the chart demonstrates, you cast inside of you first. You never cast all the way across the river to fish the backwater seam. Okay? You want to start on the near side to you, and you want to work progressively across the river. Now, because you're not using a float, that is going to reach its maximum reach capability. It's going to pendulum in towards you. The biggest mistake folks make when they're drift fishing is they'll follow that down the drift, and they'll get about a 45-degree angle to you right towards the very inside edge of that current seam, and they'll start reeling in. And for steelhead, that's a huge mistake. Steelhead take the path of least resistance, will always lie on the inside of the current seam, taking a rest, and if they're not, nobody's putting pressure on them, people aren't walking through the water, they haven't been scooped out of there. First thing in the morning, you definitely want to let that pendulum in and let it just sit there. Sometimes you let it literally sit there, and a steelhead will come and pick it up. There is nothing more satisfying than drift fishing, albeit for steelhead, chinook, coho, and feeling them take the bite. Feeling them chewing on your eggs or your sand shrimp, and just let them do it. Just let them do it, and let them do it. And once the rod starts doubling over, you reel down a little bit, and you set the hook. It's a great success that you can experience, and not many people do anymore because we're so accustomed to float fish and everything else. So if you want to take it on, I prefer to use bait caster or level line reels because just the sensation and feeling of the rod in one hand versus the way you hang a spinning reel in your hand. Plus, as I get to about 45 degrees downriver and I'm still in the current seam, I can thumb releasing line off my spool and extend my drift, something that you train yourself to do. With a spinning reel, it gets kind of awkward because you got to lift and get line to come off of your spool. And this is a real nice, easy, smooth, extending that drift to get a little bit more water than you got on the first cast. So I go across the river in succession. I get to that far side. As you fish further away from you, you're going to find that you may, like I have caught steelhead multiple times, I look at that back current seam, and on the back side of it, as it's kind of bouncing off rocks and structure, there's like this slick. And I look at that and I go, man, that just looks really good for where fish want to rest. And the only way I can get there is through way upriver. I'm using these stick leads, which seldom if ever hang up. So because that 6-inch stick lead weighs 0.42, so just under ½ ounce. So I throw that sucker upriver, allow it to drop and take its time because it's not a real heavy weight. Once I start feeling bottom, I probably got that rod up here like this, because I don't want the line down in the water dragging it away from the seam I'm trying to keep it in. If I'm holding this down here and I'm 40 feet across the river, that downriver line belly is going to pull that presentation off of that shoreline. So you got to make sure that you hold your rod up. You start feeling that fish bite, it's game on. You drop that rod, pick up your slack, wait until it loads, and set the hook. Okay? So a little different presentation, still one that, done properly, you're going to catch a lot of fish. Yes, question?
And how would you do it with a spinning reel instead?
Well, you're going to fish it the same way as a spinning reel. I mean, you're going to throw it out there, close your bail, collect your slack, hold your rod up, you know, for the far distance shot. And as it comes down, you're going to drop it down in and, you know, collect your slack and get that line belly out. If you're extending your drift with a spinning rod, if you have a decent reel, I'm not saying all reels, the line won't just naturally come off of it, but it's coiling off of there. Sometimes it hangs up and you got to pop your reel up and down. I just like to maintain a level presentation. So I'm not saying you can't do it with a spinning reel. The other thing we should talk about is rod length. You know, this is a 9.5 foot 6 to 15. This is an old West Coast Lamy. I've had this thing for years. It's one of my favorite steelhead rods. If somebody asks me what's the ideal steelhead rod for float fishing, drift fishing, whatever, I can only afford one rod. I'm going to tell you, get something that is 9.5. That's really comfortable to fish out of a boat or off the beach. I can float fish with it. I can drift fish. And being that 6 to 15, 8 to 17 at a max, you know. But that 6 to 15, I got a bunch of them. It just, for me, for steelhead, that's the stuff. I really like that rod. One other point I was going to mention, and now I forgot, so apparently it wasn't that important. Any other questions? Yeah.
Fixed weight versus a...
This one here is a fixed weight. Yeah, I don't really fish slider weights for drift fishing anymore. I used to, and I just, you know, there's always that theory that when the fish picks it up, they can start pulling away, and they're not going to feel the weight. But I tell you, if a steelhead's picking up your presentation, they're not going to go, oh, what's that? And just, you know, they're there to eat. Steelhead are there to eat. They're not going to die like salmon. They don't get fickle and just kind of decide, well, maybe I'll eat that because it's what I do. I'm a fish. Steelhead, they're not going to die after spawning. So they need to keep up their nourishment source, right? So chances are you give them a good presentation, they're going to pick it up, and they're going to make a decision to go with it. So
you highlight on the you know, starting out closer to you and then working your way out in the stream. You were saying, you know, always start, you know, closer to you on the inside seam rather than the outside.
Yeah. Repeat that.
Yeah. Can you just highlight on you know, your theory behind that?
Oh, because well, especially like. Huh?
Repeat the question.
Yeah. So the question was talking again about why. What's the reason behind working from the inside, working your way out across the stream? Typically, fish are going to be lying in the water of least resistance. They will tuck inside, or they'll be on the opposite side of the current stream. So if I'm throwing out mid-river, and then so I have quite a bit more line off of my reel, and as that pendulum's on through and it's landing 30, 40 feet down below me, there could be a fish sitting 20 feet below me. So if I cast 15, 20, 25 feet out in front of me and it pendulums over, it might be right where that fish is. You follow me? So I'm going to work that successively across the river. That way, every time it comes over, it's just a little further down. And like it shows here in the diagram, I'm going to do that 4, 5, 6 times, whatever it takes to work that piece of water. I'm going to walk down river 10, 15 feet. I'm going to repeat the process. That's why I refer to it as a grid pattern search. You literally are hunting for fish. You know, unlike hunting, and I love to hunt, I mean, we can see what we're going after. Fishing, you got to find them, man. And if you don't have a fish plotter, you can't see where they're at on your graph, and you're dissecting a river, you got to make sure you fish all water that's going to hold fish. And don't just pass up on stuff, right? And if you're simply casting mid-river, do a couple drifts through, and then you take steps down, I guarantee you're missing fish. So, answer the question?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, all right. I use stick leads for pretty much everything where I'm ever dragging lead. They have just been proven time and time again. Back years ago when Herzog and I were doing radio, he was building these things out of spinner shafts, stainless steel 0.35 spinner shafts, and hollow core lead. Converted me over to using them. One day we were fishing out on the OP, and I took one of his stick leads and hung it under a bobber, and he said, what are you going to do with that? And I said, I'm going to bobber dog with a stick lead. And he goes, well, nobody's ever done that. And I said, well, I'm going to. And I had a little grub, a little translucent grub on it. I threw it back on this back seam, and it floated on through there, and that bobber disappeared. And he was like, well, that's a first. And so I started running stick leads on my bobber dogging rigs, and pretty soon other people started running stick leads on their bobber dogging rigs. And now a lot of guys who are bobber dogging, except Brandon. I can't get him to get off those tangle frees, but to each his or her own. I choose to use stick leads because I believe in them, and I don't spend a lot of time retying out throughout the day. I seldom lose a stick lead. Buddies lose stick leads because they don't come back out of trees. But when you're in the water, you're gonna find they work pretty well.